How do they all get to control? So in 1917, Representative Oscar Callaway enters into a congressional record detailing J.P. Morgan hiring 12 high-ranking news managers who were given the task to determine the most influential newspapers in America and how many outlets to control, generally the policy of the daily press of the United States. And the conclusion was they would only need to purchase the control of 25 of the greatest newspapers in the country. This was back in 1917. The front group to determine the paper's policies was the Council on Foreign Relations. So now they admit it amongst themselves. In 1993, the Washington Post did an article called Ruling Class Journalists. It says the executive editor, managing editor, and foreign editor of the New York Times are members of the CFR, along with executives of such other large newspapers as the Wall Street Journal, the LA Times, the weekly news magazines, network television executives and celebrities, Dan Rather, Tom Brokaw, Jim Lehrer, for example, and various columnists, among them Charles Krauthammer, William Buckley, George Will, and Jim Hoagland. Okay, so Dan Rather, Tom Brokaw, Jim Lehrer, for people that at the time this was written, those were people who say, oh yeah, of course, those are leftists. But here, the bottom ones are the people that maybe that consider themselves conservative or constitutional. They would say, oh my goodness, Charles Krauthammer and William Buckley and George Will, those guys are conservatives, but they're not. William Buckley, member of Skull and Bones, as well as the Council on Foreign Relations. These guys are neocons that are touting the so-called conservative version of events that are within the acceptable narrative of the conspiracy. We need to understand that the left and right are completely false. The membership of these journalists in the council, however they may think of themselves, is an acknowledgement of their active and important role in public affairs and of their ascension into the American ruling class. They do not merely analyze and interpret foreign policy for the United States, they help make it. So these guys are not just reporting what's going on, they are the ones making the opinions that will help get the support, the legitimacy of what the government is doing. That is their role, is to provide the legitimacy of what the government is doing. So now we look at the corporate members of the Council on Foreign Relations to help us to realize not just the members, right, individual members, which helps broaden it, but the corporations themselves that are in charge of today. What we saw back in 1917 was the 25 newspapers. What do we see today? Apple, Bank of America, right? Chevron, Exxon, all of the Facebook, Google. So your research results, the things that are blocked, right? The fact checkers on Facebook, all the banks. And we see all these other organizations that are PayPal. You can see all these different groups that are out there to help promote, that are there to make sure and silence any counter narrative, but also using, right? Why do we see all of these different corporations out there that, during Pride Month, right? TikTok owned by the Chinese government. So this isn't trying to say that China, conservatives say that China is a part of the conspiracy trying to undermine America. TikTok and the Chinese government is part of the conspiracy through the CFR. And so we see these groups that are out there. We see their advertising, the television shows that are used to promote certain agenda items out there. So we see them all together, and you can see why they're out there, just like with the original intent back in 1917, to control the public narrative of what, the information war that Deseret News talked about. And so this is not just the so-called left media, but Fox News, National Review, the Weekly Standard. And on the local level, the Salt Lake Tribune is owned by a national network as well. We have the controlling interest with the Huntsmans, which CFR members. You have the Deseret News, who has had multiple CFR members on not only on their editorial board, but as their main publisher. And so we have through these networks on the local level as well as the national level. And we see like National Review, Fox News, Weekly Standard are used by so-called conservative talk radio hosts as their talking points of which direction are they going, what's the approved narrative of what Republicans are allowed to talk about, what is the approved solution, right? during the height of the fake pandemic, you had people like Glenn Beck promoting the idea of keeping people at home, promoting the shutdown, promoting the vaccine, because that was the approved narrative from the right, not only just the approved narrative from the so-called left. And so we have to recognize that this is not a left versus right issue. We have to remember what the Deseret News admitted. This is the local paper admitting what the CFR and the UN has already said, that we are in an information war. We have to admit it, and we have to stop falling for the damage that's being meant for us to be tricked by, and start to go on the offense with this information war. Otherwise, we're going to continue to fall victim to it and promote the agenda that is helping the conspiracy. What are the main things that they were afraid of, right? They were afraid of losing legitimacy. That's what we've been talking about, is we have to delegitimize the people in power, because they are part of this conspiracy to destroy liberty. We don't understand that. We don't recognize it. We are going to lose.